are currently live for our virtual visit with Albert Abdul-Barr Wang, and we are waiting for him to join us. Hello, hello. I believe I can search for him myself, so I'm going to send him a notification. Welcome, welcome everyone. I'm also going to tag Albert.
Hi. Oh.
Hi, how's it going?
Uh, More adventures with technology, I suppose.
Yep, yep.
You know how it is. There's just so many ways people are communicating, and then you have to learn a new set of rules for every platform, it seems.
Yeah, it's
So,
true. It's definitely true. Cool. Yay. Yeah, and it looks like since the last time we've done this even, which was 2 weeks ago, they like maybe updated the formatting and like design of this Instagram Live. So yeah, it's
oh
definitely I
yeah.
think that's part of the learning curve too, is I got on today and I was like, oh, this is new. They like reorganize things. So yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I think video people that play video games have it a lot
Oh, hi,
worse.
Stephanie. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, like for example, if you go try log into World of Warcraft, it's like, this doesn't look like what it was a month ago. So,
Yeah, they're updating it. So, I mean, God, like, to think what it looked like when I was in high school and now, I didn't even realize people still play it.
oh,
But
it's very popular.
yeah,
Actually, COVID was actually probably the biggest driving factor for video games getting more popular.
yeah,
So,
no, makes sense. Makes sense. I was a Sims person. I always loved The Sims.
yeah, well, I feel bad for all the professors having to try to teach art classes digitally. That's just really the hardest transition for them.
Yeah,
So,
definitely, definitely. Cool. Well, I would say we can maybe give it a minute or so for a couple more people to join. But those that are already here, as you may or may not know, this is our virtual visit program, which we started last year, 2020, during the lockdown. We are based here in New York. We do a lot of things online as well. We are an arts platform that supports artists and creative early careers, and we also have an online site where we curate and sell original work under 800. We do a lot of things, but this series of programs that we started during the lockdown last year were a really fun way to stay connected to our community, because obviously it was really tough. And we've had a lot of really wonderful people join officially as members since then. And one of them is with us today, Albert. And it's been really fun, Al, to like get to know you. And you've been so active, which has been really cool. So I'm glad that we can finally have you on for this program and get to know you a little bit more.
yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
don't think this is like usually I'm so used to like written interviews. This is like very awesome and different. And being able to talk to somebody face to face.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, for sure. I know. I think the big response we always get from people after the program is, "Oh, that was really so great because it pushed me to really have to think critically about my practice again and have all these really deep conversations, and it pushed me forward in my studio." So I'm hoping that the same will be the case for you. But
yeah,
anyway,
well, thanks. Okay.
yeah. So I have a little few lines that I like to read to introduce you formally for those that may not know too much about you. And then I figure we can dive in. And just a couple housekeeping items. The program lasts about 45 minutes for those watching us, and you're welcome to put questions in the chat, or you can formally use the question button that's here on Instagram Live, and I'll keep an eye on them. But we usually leave the question portion towards the end unless they feel like especially relevant to what we're talking about. And it's pretty conversational. So without further ado, Albert Abdul-Barr Wang is a Salt Lake City-based conceptual photographer, fabric, tapestry, sculptor, and installation artist. His projects focus on historical and economic archives, glitches in artificial intelligence as it relates to Muslim identity, surveillance and linguistics, science fiction, capitalist machinery, Afrolinguistics, and the commodification of political violence through technology and social media. Originally from Brooklyn, New York, he is currently pursuing an honors BFA in photography and digital imaging at the University of Utah, which is where I assume you're currently based in Salt Lake City.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And you're in your big open studio space shared today, which is
Pretty much. But I
classic
mean,
BFA. Yeah.
it may be the case, but really, I think one needs, especially during the COVID era, to realize studio spaces, especially as a conceptual artist, tend to be very open, you know? And my practice is, I think, just about anywhere I walk or am close to is a studio space, you know?
Mm.
And this is a good way to like segue into some work that I've been pursuing recently. Uh, Here, I'll use my laptop. So this is actually the series I'm currently working on. At SVA, I'm actually working on doing the online art residency at SVA. This is called Arrangements. That's just the general category. It's actually not, a strict series. My friend Chumbum Park actually wrote his analysis of it, which I'm very grateful for. So I jokingly call this like my lowbrow minimalism. And I know there's a lot of great humor, but it's also surprisingly, a lot of folks tend to assume I just do very overtly political work,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not just about that. This is like my deep-seated reflection on the nature of art practice, just looking at, for example, common objects. This tape here is right up, here. And it's really fascinating just relooking at generally American minimalism,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and then, you know, remixing it and adapting it to our, late state capitalist era, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting. Like this very inexpensive material is still has elements of something that's very industrialized, mass produced. But and this is actually a remix of a Carl Andre metal piece from
Okay.
the late 60s. But instead, the metal is very much erect in the photo.
Mm-hmm.
Here, it just completely just collapses. I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
well, you could say a Klaus Odienberg humor in the fact that it's soft, but
Mm-hmm.
it's also a satire of that very, Carl Andre has, as people know, has his issues.
Mm-hmm.
It's that, again, that deconstruction of the heroic male, usually, typically white male, posture and privilege. And minimalism is very much tied to that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you have to understand, my studio can be anywhere. Like this is an intervention piece that's just was close to where my office downtown. And I just happened to see these two cones and I was like, that deserves to be rearranged. And I'm actually going to zoom out a little so it's
Yeah, I
easier
was
to
curious
see.
if you could maybe like click to like could show full screen and like on the computer. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a really, I'm glad that you brought this up at the very beginning, because I know that before the program we chatted a little bit about that. And we don't, I would say at Paradise Palace we tend to lean on really like bold and bright and colorful, very texture process based work that lives maybe a little bit more traditionally within the realm of what people think of when they think of fine art. And so we're always learning about all of the various ways that people work conceptually as artists and as creatives. And I think it's definitely an important thing to kind of remind that because of that process that is could you at any moment in your life you could be finding an inspiration that could launch an entire investigation, which I think happens for a lot of people. But I'm glad that you brought that up, that anywhere could be your studio and any moment could be a spark for something that would relate to this larger oeuvre that you call your ongoing practice. So yeah.
Oh yeah, and it's really interesting because it's a strange irony being, a kid of immigrant parents. And,
Mm-hmm.
my dad, he passed away like 2 years ago.
Mm.
And I was very lucky because, I was able to inherit. It was also not easy because my mom lives with me, but it
Mm-hmm.
was a very difficult reconciliation,
Mm-hmm.
having to deal with like violence and abuse when I was younger and just
Mm.
learning how to forgive. But
Mm.
it's really interesting. For the first time, I became a house owner. But,
Mm-hmm.
the question now is at what price?
Right.
It's not like, I mean, it makes you really think about what is the value of artistic labor and capitalism. Like,
Mm-hmm.
even though I worked hard, I worked a lot of like gig jobs, at computer software companies for years, the healthcare industry, and no way I would have been able to, just qualify to get even that house, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm expected, my mom expects me, since it's a traditional Asian family, that I take care of her and all that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like I really begin to my art has become very self-reflective.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I started looking at just like these things that people take for granted and
Mm-hmm.
they, for me, gets, an artist is, there's always the element of alchemy and being a magician.
Hmm.
And there's always that sleight of hand as well, just being able to transform these objects. And partially, a lot of it's just, people think, oh, you're just using these cheap materials. But, I think it's my reaction to looking at how much the contemporary art world has been geared towards really looking things very refined, polished, you know, and it's just like there are other like languages of art,
Mm-hmm.
that I think are very important. In fact, we can look, and what's really interesting is, even as an undergrad, let me see if I can like exit out of this. Sorry. Oh, there it
Okay.
is. Um, but yeah, it's like, a lot of people don't, tend to, it's funny for all the visual language. Here, I'm going to put my screen too. But for all the visual languages and the variety, I really think a lot of people go one of very two extremes. Like
Mm-hmm.
they either are very dependent on their assistants, or they just completely have to assume there's this neo-romantic idea they have to do all the art themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But there's really very, maybe occasionally if you're doing social practice, there's very little of that idea of the like art that's done as a community or a communal experience.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, like, yeah, okay, like I have the idea, but then like if I have people that help me out, like I try to acknowledge that within my practice and
Yeah.
not just assume like, and I know like occasionally like sometimes people that show art like to say, oh, this just came out of nowhere. But I still think as a conceptual artist to acknowledge the process that went into that is very important. Like for example,
Yeah, absolutely.
if we look at like say my tapestry work, like these are actually digitally woven. Like I'm not, I wish I had, that capability to do the fiber art.
Mm-hmm.
But also, what's really interesting is, oh, you didn't really do it, did you? I mean, but the idea came up, I came up with the idea, but also I do a lot of research on the process. If
Mm-hmm.
I were to hand weave these, you would lose a very important, aspect of the critical theory that's behind the tapestries that I'm doing.
Yeah,
And,
I had
go
a
ahead.
question. Sorry, yeah, I think that these are this body of work in particular, that these tapestries, maybe because it's easy, it's a really digestible jumping off point for across your practice as it's a more physical object. But yeah, I'm always curious when people, make work like this that directly relates to that digital process that removes the artist's hand, but it's still an object that feels like tied to something so craft.
Oh, yes.
And I'm curious, like, how integral, also because you're pulling a lot of found images and you're doing a lot of like digital composite that is being translated through these style pieces. I know if you scroll farther down, you have a lot more of them too.
Oh yeah,
Um,
definitely.
yeah, and you know, sometimes they're just yeah, like blatant photographs, you know, but they feel this like a strange like memorializing or like archiving in a way. Um,
Yes.
whereas otherwise a lot of the work you're doing is feels very ephemeral, and I'm curious like why, like how important that is to this side of your process, that like physical archiving.
Very, very important. You
Yeah.
know, photography is very much rooted in, well, Roland Barthes and Cameron Lucida, referred to the interconnection between death and photography.
Mm-hmm.
That photography, a lot of people confuse, oh, photography and cinema are the same. They're not. Because cinema, you can see the previous frames where the action has happened.
Mm-hmm.
Photography can record death directly because there's a has-been state. Barth refers to that.
Hmm.
So it's every time you take a photograph, it's actually you're almost killing somebody basically, or because there's an element of death. Once something is photographed, there's an implication of the trace of the existence of what has been photographed, and that's
Hmm.
why some people, when you see people put a hand to the camera, it's it's a throwback to the 19th century when there was this very strong belief, like Balzac wrote a lot in his short stories
Mm-hmm.
about when somebody takes a photograph of you, they're stealing bits of your life, literally, because they didn't really understand the premise. You thought it was all this mysterious magic,
Right. Yeah.
the devil's tool, basically.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I love thinking about it that way, and I love that you talked at the beginning too of the magic and being an artist and an
Yes.
alchemist, and that sleight of hand illusion that always has to sort of go into it, and like where like how much of that illusion is revealed, how much of it is, you know, hidden or whatever. It's yeah, I like that, and I like thinking of that in context with what you're talking about now in the history of photography, and as that,
Yeah.
I mean, that talk about a way to think about archive. I love that. Yeah, maybe share with us a little bit more about these types of images that are being shown in the tapestries.
Yeah, I will definitely do that. So for me, digital tapestry weaving is fairly important because there's a text by Manuel de Landa where he talks about the era of, intelligent, war during the age of intelligent machines, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And in that book, what's most important is he talks about the first war machine is actually the Jacquard loom. So basically,
Wow.
when digital computing was invented by weaving, they were able to devise like multiple war machines, and then warfare became mechanized. So really, weaving is the basis for World War One, World War Two, maybe even the Holocaust. It's a very dark history, and it's
Hmm.
interesting. So for me, tapestry represents the intersection of history painting, photography, archiving, but also that magic can be very dangerous. It's like dark arts, basically. So,
Hmm.
like, for example, like this was, like the Mossad assassination of, Wiles Ryder, basically, in his apartment in Rome, basically. And it's really sad because he was actually in the midst of translating the Arabian Nights Entertainment. And they found the bullet which entered into, actually was in Emily Jasar, who's a Palestinian artist, that really gave me the idea for this. This is a very fairly early work of mine, but it's like the idea of war machines, just
Mm-hmm.
somebody that's a cultural icon, but yet also a political activist that just did not mesh with, was seen as a threat because of his activism. This is
Hmm.
actually a fairly important car bombing that happened in Washington, D.C., where the CIA actually funded, and this is the bombing of Orlando
Mm-hmm.
Lettier and his assistant. And they were killed in Washington, D.C. because they were perceived as a threat due to their research on saying that, hey, our Latin American countries getting exploited. economically, and they were going to present a research paper. Basically, the response, the CIA decided to fund the country to have their secret police put the bomb on them, and that's the result. This was actually even more recent. A journalist who was part of the ICIJ, a female journalist, very brilliant, in Malta, exposes the highest corruption in her country. And then, she leaves, says goodbyes to her son, and then goes to work, and then the car bomb hits her. And her son actually views her murder, basically.
Oh,
Because the
God.
car, yeah. And so these are fairly dark stories. And this is actually in my hometown in Salt Lake City, where a guy sells fake documents to the Mormon church. And the Mormon church, tried for a while to suppress the fact that, oh my gosh, like they find they're fake, but they can't admit they're fake because it would make them look bad.
Wait, is that
Uh,
that new documentary that just came out on Netflix? Is that what that's about?
I think so. It's Mark Hoffman. And
Yeah.
basically, yeah,
Yeah.
this is it. This is the car bomb.
Oh, interesting.
In fact, he actually tried to cover up his crime. I actually passed by the building where he blew up and killed people. So I always pass by that building every day. And, Salt Lake City is a really interesting place for doing research. People say, why do you live in Utah? Because for me, art has been a form of visual and cultural excavation. That, for me, the exploration of the hidden hidden power and its structure. This is obviously Jeffrey Epstein.
Mm-hmm.
He actually put an ad trying to solicit to get dates, very early ad. So, I'm not kidding, but I also make sure the tapestry's upside down to
Yeah.
represent his crooked history. This one apparently is interesting too, because I actually had been friends with one of Jeffrey Epstein's victims, who
Oh,
also was
wow.
an artist. Yeah, Maria Farmer.
Oh, you know Maria Farmer.
And,
Okay, I was gonna say that
oh
article's
yeah,
about her. Yeah.
yeah. But I actually know her, talked to her. I actually have some archives from her. I haven't figured out. Out of respect, it's kind of she's going under a very difficult situation.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, again, sort of drawing the parallels between the Mormon church here, the LDS church here, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of the accumulation of wealth. And it's really interesting. Actually, I have another piece that the research shows that Jeffrey Epstein and the LDS church, through a very intricate method, used the same accounting company for money laundering and hiding the funds,
Oh, wow.
which is yeah. And it's kind of scary because actually Utah does a lot of money laundering for a lot of firms in New York City.
Oh man,
So
we're getting into a whole other conversation now.
yeah, so I
Yeah.
could spend all time, but this is the work that draws all those connections
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. I mean,
My
I feel,
friend,
yeah. I mean, just to sort of summarize here, I mean, I love this series too with all these people
yeah,
wearing like Blue
it's
Lives
actually,
Matter pro-Trump paraphernalia stuff. But I feel like the through line that we're sort of finding in a lot of these particular works sort of ties back into, your ongoing interest in discussing, like artificial intelligence as it relates to Muslim identity or, non-white identities, surveillance, and especially I think this commodification of, political violence and all of the different ways that like, late stage capitalism has sort of just blurred all of the lines for us. And yeah, I think it's, well, yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a moment. But I think it's really interesting to hear you share about all of this, especially, yeah, like you were saying, like Salt Lake City, and I don't think people really think of as a city that could really hold a lot of influence for people maybe in the art world, but it sounds like as a conceptual artist who's looking outside of the normal conversations, it seemed to be bringing a lot of influence for you. Um,
oh yeah,
but
definitely, and especially because as a New Yorker and
mhm.
intersectional minority both ways as a you know
Mm-hmm.
Muslim and Asian American. And, also, I always jokingly say I'm a magician of sorts in my real life. I've escaped death multiple times, like Houdini, like last year, I was almost twice after COVID hit, ran over by two separate people because I looked Asian. And, I mean,
My
that
Lord.
sort of fear gets onset. And,
Yeah.
when you start realizing how many times you've been close to death, art really comes closer to you. You
Mm-hmm.
start valuing your art practice because you don't know, especially now, the hate crimes, 900% increase for Asian Americans. I don't know if I'm going to be around in a year, really. So you start making work maybe out of desperation, out of the fact
Hmm.
that you have to leave something behind because you just don't know. And the thing about violence is that it's probably the most democratic thing. People with these mass shootings, when someone wields a gun, it does not discriminate, you know, race, economics. The victims are random,
Hmm.
and it's really scary
Hmm.
because Jesse, who gave me the grant, was very scared because I put this tapestry to him in October, and then we had the Capitol riots, in this year, and it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of weird. Like I don't want to say I'm prophetic, but it's like, whoa, it's like hitting way too close to home, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And these photographs are actually crowdsourced photos from because I'm an activist.
Yeah.
So these are the images that came through from the database, as sort of
Oh, okay.
lookout. And these are not like officially on even a, this is even before the government wanted to even try to prosecute the Capitol riots. But
Mm-hmm.
people like really like people that are involved with social activism are tend to be like 10 times more eagle-eyed because you have to be very, as a minority, and you have to be very careful.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
But
Uh, Go ahead.
no, you first.
Oh, I
Sorry.
was just gonna ask if you had any in progress work that you were interested in
Yeah.
sharing with us, maybe also.
Oh my gosh. I don't know whether I should share it. It might scare people. Oh my. Okay.
Well,
So
I feel we've already hit quite a number of pretty intense topics, so I feel
that's
like
all right. So here's the boxes I use for my arrangements.
uh-huh.
Obviously in a different arrangement. This is very important. This is my sculptural. I have two lockers. That's that's because I'm a photography and sculpture major.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to like put these up. Um, I'll show you the room where I actually put them up and then document them. I have to take them down because surprisingly people have been known to recycle each other's art, like
Mm.
literally here. Um, here's here's actually a piece I'm working on right now. This is very dark.
Is it the boxes of sorry, I think we didn't see it properly. Is that
No,
that
no, here it
boxes
is.
thing? Oh, okay.
These are actually photographs I'm actually cutting out.
Got it.
So yeah, this is actually for Justin Watson. Great guy. He's an awesome artist.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are three key politically violent moments in history. And I'm looking at photography as capturing the exact moments of, say, like a public execution. So this is the Christmas of 1989 when the Romanian dictator and his wife made a speech
Mm.
to attempt to say, hey, we should retain power. The response, I mean, they've committed a lot of genocide, so they're not like free of the blame. But a
Mm-hmm.
mob decided to make a trial. The trial lasted about an hour and a half, and then they were taken out to be executed.
Wow.
This was like, yeah, so this is like one of the very few times you see they actually had a lot of state television footage for the execution. So this is the moment when they were, well, I mean, 120 shots from, Kalashnikovs. So,
Yeah.
and
And
then
how is that going to ultimately live?
I'm going to be cutting out the figures as shadows
Okay.
of like death. This is actually another important moment. This is actually frame 313 from the Zoo Predator film when President Kennedy was shot. So
Oh, yeah. Okay. I see that now.
you can
Yeah.
see that, and actually this footage Zoo Predator tried to suppress for like 10 years because he thought this would be traumatic for the nation. So he actually cut the film and respliced it.
Oh,
So
wow.
this is the missing frame
Oh,
and you
wow.
can see where the rifle shot hits
Yeah. Yeah.
him.
That's
And then
interesting.
the final portion of my installation I will be working on today is this. This is the last frame of Brian De Palma's movie Redacted. So during the Iraqi War, there was actually a rape of a 14-year-old Iraqi woman. They never actually had the footage, but Brian De Palma decided to uh, basically make a fictional reconstruction of that event when the U.S. military, you know, during the Iraqi War decided, hey, we're just going to do this. And so that's the body of the girl after she was raped, and
Oh,
her
man.
family was killed. And they tried to burn all the evidence too. So that's, you can see basically like probably a lot of oil stains, and
Mm-hmm.
it's very depressing. But these are like the three, for me, these like represent the three key moments in history when mass media and violence intersect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember the Iraqi War. I mean, I remember 9/11. I'm old enough to remember because I was working in the office and I wasn't really an artist then. And it's like, you don't, once those events happen, it's like you can never, I don't feel like I can remove them from my mind. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
this, like something's just sinking in my mind. And, I try to, I can't really be carefree. Like it's just, these images are, and it's because I'm a photographer too. I feel like this after image is burnt in my mind. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just like,
Mm-hmm.
I obviously have some humorous art that I've done too. Like I've actually remixed all the gasoline stations of Ed Ruscha. So I do have fun projects, which I'm
Yeah.
still working on uploading. But they're going to be very conceptual, sort of like you already had to know who Ed Ruscha is
Mm-hmm.
to get the joke.
Right.
So I don't
Yeah.
know.
I mean,
But
yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that little moment of, your life before art, because I like double checked from your website with your CV to remind me that this is like the third time that you've been in school now, and you actually had a
yes.
long period of time before this program that you were, well, I mean, I guess I'm sort of asking, like what were some of those motivating factors that drew you into become an artist? Because I think clearly you have a very, very deep knowledge of political histories across the world, and you're very it's very intrinsically part of your identity and how you like live in the world to like investigate all of these moments and how they can intersect, and the kinds of, basically like you were sort of saying, like leaving a mark. How can you add to that conversation is sort of how it feels like maybe was the genesis for you getting into art. But I'd be curious to hear a little bit about, what
Oh,
was that
well,
motivation? Because just to let people know really quickly, you received a BA from Vanderbilt and then a master's in environmental health science from Yale in 2001. So there was a big gap between
yes.
that and when you are starting this program now. So.
Oh, yeah, and I think a lot of it's just an unlearning process.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, back when I graduated from Yale, you would probably wanted to throw me out of your gallery. I was a complete asshole. I'm not kidding.
Okay.
Even I don't even like myself from that. I was arrogant. I knew I had gone to grad school fairly young, but,
Mm-hmm.
I went and I wanted to become an environmental regulator for the EPA. But
Hmm.
that's just because I was just thinking, okay, that's a cushy job. I can earn a lot of money. It would fit in with my prestige. And my parents really feel that.
Hmm.
I mean, they're immigrants in late stage capitalism. I mean, the neoliberal era. So they're going to make me say, oh, it's very competitive. In fact, that's the reason why my sister and I aren't friends, because, my parents, I have to admit, the sociopathic nature of our family's behavior was fostered by my parents. They made
Hmm.
me competitive with my sister. So, like for example, going to Yale, like for years my parents poked fun at me, calling me like I'd gone to a second-rate Harvard. So I actually never thought of it as prestige.
Hmm.
And for me, like I had to really unlearn a lot of psychopathic themes and tendencies. Like, when I graduated like 24, 25, I was like, I was thinking, okay, score lots of chicks, get lots of money, fancy dinners. I mean, it was like American Psycho. But then you sit
Huh.
there and you really had to unlearn a lot. For me, I really didn't start doing art until like 2006. And at that time I was like, well, I need to build a sense of connection. And, at that time I was unemployed. I had left my job in the government. And then I was like, well, I like the idea of, I thought about making a lot of money to collect art. But then I was like, well, what about if I were starting to meet people in the art, find out what it's like? I always remember those little things. And it was a very slow process of like unlearning a lot of things in my life.
Hmm.
Assumptions about like, having this unmitigated worship. I was very patriotic and jingoistic, and I had to really unlearn that because I never really questioned it, and I was very
Wow. Yeah.
privileged.
Yeah.
And then, I feel happy to be. I'm very grateful, and I've become more spiritual, over the years,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, like, I know my art may seem very depressing, but it's like, for me, it's about, I think it's a warning, perhaps even to myself, like, what happened if I weren't compassionate? Like, these are the things in history where,
Hmm.
like, violence has happened, but, violence happens. A lot of people think violence happens because that's the way nature functions.
Mm-hmm.
But to be honest, nature really actually values equilibrium.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's the lack of compassion. And I think it's a lot of misinterpretation. They want this Darwinistic, like, survival of the fittest. So they figured they just got to implement it as social practice. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's like art is a way of like moving away from those accepted paradigms into like perhaps we can make new worlds. It's like science fiction for me now. And for me,
Hmm.
like my art is always try to be rooted in intelligent compassion. I think I put that up in my Instagram. And it's not easy because people
Say that
think,
again. Sorry, you cut out.
oh, my art is try to be rooted in intelligent compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people think if you're compassionate, you're weak. It's really, you know, very hard to be compassionate because they think you're like, oh, you're like naive, or,
Mm-hmm.
it's tied to like the idea that you really don't know anything. That's why you're like nice to everybody. And, for me, no, I mean, I feel like it's important to help people. And part
Mm-hmm.
of it's just like I sincerely want to do it. And
Mm-hmm.
then I also realize it's important.
Yeah.
There's an ethical duty. That's why I do curating as well,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like, you can sit there and focus on your own art practice all the time, but you also, I hate to admit it, especially with COVID, you can stay at home, but you also become very antisocial too,
Yeah.
It becomes very
We've
habitual.
definitely been trying to find that balance between,
Mm-hmm.
keeping our distance still and then re-emerging into the world, especially here in New York. Yeah, wow. That wasn't the answer I was expecting, but as you talked about it, it makes a lot of sense to think about, especially knowing you worked in the government previously too. It really kind of ties it all together in a nice bow, all of these different spaces that you're trying to exist in and put a magnifying glass to and really try to investigate, expose, and like process as a form of personal unlearning, and also as a way to share all of these findings in an authentic and unique outlet.
Oh yes, yeah, and
Yeah.
and and also art is also about being resourceful.
Mm-hmm.
I feel it's important to respect our earth. I mean, I know it's kind of strange, and I don't want to go on a rant, but like, I don't know, I don't feel comfortable with like Elon Musk and this idea of space colonization, which is like, it's like, well, are we going to just sit there and destroy Mars next? I mean, that's how I feel. But like, for example, here, let me show you where I actually do a lot of my installation work.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great.
This is actually cool. Actually, my friend B, she's doing 2 solo shows, so you can see a bunch of her work here. This is actually where I do all my work, right here. See? It's getting repainted. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
So, yep, there it
So it's a
is.
nice
This is where I
white
do all my.
box.
Yes, I mean I like it because it's a very DIY white box looking gallery, but It's not a gallery. It's not a gallery in that sense. So it's kind of
Yeah.
nice to have it. And for me, I see this like you know how people in school they go to like science lab. Well, this is my art lab. So
I
you know I
love
get to
that.
go and explore. But yeah, it's like, and I know this is probably not the most orthodox studio visit because people usually have codified places. But even if I were still established, I'd still go on the street, make art. I mean, David Hammons, you know, he went out and tried to sell snowballs. You know, that's I'm not kidding. Like that's
No,
actually a
I
very meaningful thing, you know?
yeah. Yeah, well, I think that's something that yeah, I mean, I think that you're, you're just continuing to drive home what all of these that well, it brought me to a topic slash question that I sort of made a note about, thinking about how you take any moment, encounter, object, experience as a jumping off point for your work. And, we sort of talked about that in the beginning also, but it seems to continuously ring true that you have so many different spaces that you're drawing influence from that any moment could become an opportunity for you to investigate something within, the lens of your art practice. And I think as long as we're also all here living, in and among late stage capitalism, in many ways, any moment in time could play a role in that investigation.
Oh yeah, yeah, but it's really hard. You know, we'll see. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on my honors thesis, and it's going to be interesting to see how they respond to some of the results of my research. You know,
Mm-hmm.
because my university is, I mean, the art department is obviously going to be more liberal than a lot of other places, but it's like we're dealing with the after effects of like a woman on campus who was assaulted and murdered, and that I'm not kidding. And it's funny, like how much the school has tried to protect that privilege and just I wouldn't say completely cover up, but it's like it made people really reflect on like campus safety. But for
Mm-hmm.
me, I don't just only reflect on that. I started investigating and looking at like what is the police system on campus like?
Mm-hmm.
How is the military technology? Because remember, Utah is very powerful. We
Mm-hmm.
house the NSA data center, and that
Oh,
collects the
okay.
data of everything. And maybe not just this country. I mean, Trevor Paglen would have a field day with that. But it's like right there in my backyard in
Mm-hmm.
Bluffdale is the NSA data center.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just purely like the biggest computer in the world. And in
Yeah.
fact, it's so powerful, they actually had to build a separate electric power grid for it
Wow.
because
Wow.
because they don't want people tapping to it.
Right.
Like literally, it's a fortress. I've actually been on, close by. You obviously can't enter.
Yeah.
It's funny because in my honor thesis, which isn't going to be out for a while. You see this tower, and then there's actually a sniping tower. So maybe there's guards there that if you're too close, they might put you
Yeah.
off, literally. But it's like,
Well, yeah. Well, I think that, ties into the conversations about, how close can about trying to push that boundary and, like who gets to control, those conversations and that information and, what is the risk and the fate of someone who tries to, expose that information because it seems like you're constantly interested in that. And yeah, and I think, man, I just keep losing my space. Oh, I remember now. Your work is starting to align a lot with this artist that we've worked with before. Her name is Bahara Kashui. I don't know if you're
ooh,
familiar with her,
I may
but
have heard of it. I'll have to check it
yeah,
out.
she's done some video work that also deals with like video surveillance spaces and trying to like call attention to the absurdity of those types of plots, similarly like to what you're talking about. And then she also more recently has been doing work surround that looks at artificial intelligence and like computer systems that are innately biased towards minority groups that are being like used
Oh yeah.
in government spaces and things like that. So she does a lot of investigation around that, and I feel like that there's a kindred spirit in that relationship.
Oh yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah,
It's really a
I'll put it
blessing
in the
because
chat for those that are
I
interested
I will
too.
have well, sadly enough, it's hard to record chats on cell phones,
I'll
but
send it. I'll send it to you separately.
yeah, I appreciate it. It's just
Yeah.
interesting because for me, I'm just going to give, and this might be a short plug. I'm really grateful to you guys, Paradise Palace, because it's like really hard, especially in a fairly, and not, I mean, the U is very awesome. We have actually some very radical, professors here in terms of their art practice, but it's
Mm-hmm.
still driven towards academic painting.
Mm-hmm.
Photography is still, I think, seen as like second rate as art. It's mostly driven towards commercial photography. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people, wedding photos is like big business here, which is why a lot of people major in that. So it's like, for me, it's like, I don't know. It's like, where do you want to find your tribe type of thing? And when you first welcomed me, I think I photographed your note. It was really awesome because I think a lot of people, and I hate to admit it, I love New York too, but I feel like there's just elitism too, and I don't want to go on another rant, but it's like people
Yeah, we
tend
don't have
to
time for that
judge,
today.
well, people tend to judge too quickly on like, oh, that looks too decorative or like, too DIY, but really there's a certain profundity in that because
Mm-hmm.
nothing's, everything's going to have to be decorative. Even the most conceptual of ideas, like
Mm-hmm.
Hans Hatta, is still, there's an element of decoration. Maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
not the decoration 90% on, but it's still, there's going to be those elements.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I started, and it took me a while because I had to unlearn a lot of stuff that is just not good in art history classes. Like certain forms of art are better than others. Or like, well, I mean, obviously, there's, white privilege in art
Yeah.
history,
Yeah.
you know, praxis. But for me, like, I had to sit and like, whoa, like appreciate quilting, which, I probably wouldn't have done that when I was younger. And for me, I felt like as I got older, I feel like my mind's just, ballooning away. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in my MFA? I'm expecting nothing, which is probably the best way to go about it because I'm always finding new and fascinating and cool and horrifying stuff all in the same basket.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've definitely tapped a little bit into that today for sure.
Oh yeah.
Well, you're only halfway through, so I think there's definitely a lot more that can be
Yes.
investigated before you even move on to the next phase.
Oh,
So,
I'm really excited. And to be honest, the U is a really good university.
mm-hmm.
I mean, my friend Madison, she's actually heading off to like Yale Sculpture, this fall.
Nice.
So, I mean, we're actually have people. The problem is there's no, and I was talking with my friend Madison, there's just no support system for Utah artists who aren't doing what is deemed, the
Yeah.
mainstream here.
Who are working outside of the norm. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But it's also
Well,
interesting. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
oh no, it's okay. Well, I was just going to say that, we are kind of hitting the end here, but I do feel like that's
Oh,
a
okay.
nice segue to bring in for a moment a note about, your work in the two collectives that you're in, particularly within
Oh, yeah. I just want to give a
office
shout
space.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out. I mean, Office Space Collective is very much a shadow, like a parody of a shadow organization. But I definitely want to give props to my. Actually, I could stay here for 20 minutes thanking everyone. But the I Found You Collective, and I'm just going to tell a little story about it. It's really awesome. So I was in the SVA Artist Residency Program,
Mm-hmm.
which is an online residency last summer.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I wasn't even sure if we were going to hang out even after it was over. But now we're like awesome friends. Every week, it's like we probably meet more often than some people go to church, literally. Like we actually hang out on Zoom Sunday morning, and we actually discuss new projects, and we got like some proposals in the works, and it's really cool. It's like, wow, an online residency can actually produce like lifelong friendships, and it's just incredible. And I think a lot of people think, oh, Zoom's going to cause a very existential crisis in relationships, but I think artists, we tend to be very flexible, and I think there's going to be just different ways friendships will manifest and how people work together. I mean, gallery practice is changing too. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
people are thinking, oh, you can't go completely virtual, but you got to do a mix,
Yeah.
And
Yeah, we're definitely trying to problem solve that too, a little bit. So yeah,
Oh
I love
yeah,
to hear that. I learned briefly about that collective that you were just chatting about as well through your site, and I'm familiar with a few other artists that are in the group as well. I think Thomas Heck um,
yeah. Ribbit.
was in this chat.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, he was in this
Oh yeah,
program
yeah.
earlier
I think
too.
I'm not really looking at who's in, but I suspect
I'm
some
sure he's
people are.
around. Yeah.
But I mean, it's
Yeah,
a
and I think
blessing
that's
because
great,
I'm
you
really
know.
grateful. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Well, I mean, if we didn't really have any people pop any questions in, but I feel like you were so good to kind of answer anything that might have come up anyway. You were very thorough. So,
Well, actually, I appreciate your doing this because this isn't exactly the usual studio visit. I don't quite, and to be honest, I feel like to be honest, my practice is going to be tied mostly to the rootlessness of just how I function.
mhm.
So, I might, even if I were more established in post MFA, I'm still going to, have various studios that will happen because I'll probably end up out in the streets building something anyway. So
Yeah.
I just don't know what's going to happen
Yeah.
really. And
Well,
to be honest, oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm going to jokingly say I love television, but I don't watch much television because real life is probably the most entrancing TV there you can get. I mean, look at what happened historically. I mean, just
Yeah.
this, you had a person, Trump, who, tries to be colorful and then you had the Capitol riots. I mean, there's just so much going on. It's like, wow, it's like, TV is interesting, and it's weird because they always said, real life is stranger than fiction sometimes. So,
Yeah, well, yeah, there's always the age-old phrase, you can't write this, it's just sometimes these things happen and we could have never predicted or expected them.
oh yeah.
So they definitely can play into a strange version of reality that feels like, yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people also watch TV as escapism, and considering all the things that you're interested in your work, I can imagine that living in reality is plenty interesting for you. There's plenty to
Oh, I
talk about.
promise you, like, I'm still trying to get through the pile of books I got from the local bookstores here.
Yeah.
I mean, they
Yeah.
love me at the bookstore because
Yeah, I'm sure.
I always find too many entries. But I should probably put in a short plug-in for the show, 2 weeks.
Oh,
The
yeah,
what's that?
please. Let's close with that. Let's talk about
Yeah,
it
why
really
don't we
quick.
close with that? Because anyway, I want to thank you, Kat and Lauren, for really bringing that to fruition. It's not really. I mean, I'm sort of behind the scenes, but really, it's a show that features four feminist photographers working with the photographic archive, and it's really awesome because I was able to get different looks of how women identifying photographers look at the world, and it's really great. Uh, I think it's just the best way is just go to Paradise Palace and see the work, and
Yeah.
it's really awesome. And thank you guys for bringing that to fruition. Hopefully, we'll get some more adventures together. but
Yeah, we
I
definitely
still want
will.
to go visit New York.
This
Honestly, I
is
miss
just the
it.
beginning. Yeah, you got to come back home sometime
I
for
know, I
sure.
know. Yeah, it's just going to be interesting. I will try to come hopefully either this summer or maybe later this year. It depends.
There's no
I'm trying
rush.
to get
We'll
back
always
to
be
New
here.
York.
Yeah.
It's just frustrating.
Yeah, I know. Well, yeah, to wrap that all up, Foresight is the show that Albert's talking about. It's a pop-up that he curated that's being presented in collaboration with his collective office space. And it's going to be a pop-up over the first weekend of April, 2nd through 4th, at our space in Brooklyn. If you guys are in the area and you want to come by and see what Albert does curatorially, we highly recommend. It's definitely going to be a great show. Um, and yeah, and I think we've covered so many good topics today. So thank you so much for
Oh yeah, well, thank
taking
you
the
for
time to
inviting
talk with
me.
us. Yeah.
Honestly, and I appreciate it. It really means a lot, and it's quite interesting, especially because I don't necessarily have the most orthodox practice, but it's
That's okay.
plus plus
The
I'm very
conversations are what
excited.
matters. The
Oh
conversations are
yeah,
what
and I'll be
matter.
excited to show up at more Paradise Palace. Plug in. It's a great way to do
Yeah.
crits, meet people. So please join. Honestly,
Yeah.
it's really awesome. And I mean. I think the more variety, it would be awesome. You know, people working video art, internet art. I mean, who knows? But it all fits in, and I think it's great
Yeah, I'm
because
excited.
I mean, I don't know. Like NFTs are, I guess, are the hot thing. I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, I don't even want to get into that. That's a whole other conversation.
I know,
We'll
I
have to
know,
like
I know.
organize a panel about it at some point.
I think so, but you know, if someone tries to do a you know group show of Paradise Palace NFTs, that'll be interesting, right?
That would be
We just need to have it
interesting.
environmentally friendly. That's the most important.
Yes,
So
yes, I know that's the thing that yeah. We'll have to talk about it offline for another
I
day.
think so. I think so. But anyway, uh, thank you again, honestly.
Thank
And
you. Thank you. And thank you everybody that tuned in today. Really appreciate it. We do these bi-weekly. So the next one will be, they're usually Wednesdays. This was a special day. And the next one will be on the 31st, I believe. So tune in. And thanks everybody. We'll see
yay.
you soon.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Bye. See you
Bye.
soon.
Okay.